A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining today's webinar about how Central and Eastern Europe can solve your supply chain challenges. I realize that this is a very bold statement, and so we've got some 4 great speakers lined up for you today, who I would like to introduce to you right now. First of all, Raymond Vos, founder and CEO of CTP. CTP is the leading developer of business parks throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Secondly, René Buck, founder and CEO of BCI Global. BCI Global are experts at supply chain and manufacturing strategies. Thirdly, Miguel Martins da Silva, Group Chief Supply Chain Officer at Dr. Max. Dr. Max are a leading pharmacy chain in Europe with more than 2,000 pharmacies throughout most of Central and Eastern Europe, plus Italy. And last but not least, Raimund Petzmann, Vice President Corporate Real Estate at Zalando. Zalando are an online fashion platform from Germany and arguably one of the biggest success stories in the e-commerce industry in Europe. Oh, my name is Bert Hesseling, and I will be your moderator today. And in addition to moderating webinars, I'm also responsible and head of research at CTP. In order for you to get the most out of this webinar today, your microphones are muted, your video is turned off, but you can ask questions by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Only we as hosts can see your questions, and so we will also not mention your name and we will not mention your company name. The presentation, the webinar will be recorded, and the presentation I will share with you within 48 hours after the webinar. The program will basically consist of 3 main parts. The main part is a presentation by René Buck, and he will present why Central and Eastern Europe is so important if you want to have a resilient European supply chain. That will then be followed by question and answer sessions, a discussion with Raymond Vos, Raimund Petzmann, and Miguel Martins da Silva. And for the last 15 minutes of this webinar, the floor will be opened to you, and we will address your questions. If we will not have enough time to have your questions answered, I will make sure that I will still ask these questions to our speakers, and I will then get back to you by email afterwards. Now, before I will hand over the word to René, I would still like to make use of this opportunity to say a few words about CTP. CTP was founded at the end of the 90s by one of our speakers today, Raymond Vos. Raymond's vision when he founded CTP was that especially international companies, when setting up business in Central and Eastern Europe, they will want to work together with a reliable and professional real estate partner to make sure that they will have high quality, modern and representative buildings with potential for growth in the future that they can then operate from throughout the lifetime of their activities in the region. And so what we've done in order to meet the needs of these clients, of these companies, is that we are developing buildings and we keep them in our ownership. And we continue to maintain these buildings. On top of that, we do not only develop buildings, but we also develop parks to make sure that our clients have sufficient space in case they will be successful and they will grow. And finally, we continuously continue to add new parks to our network to make sure that we are in the right places when our clients decide to enter new markets and to grow in new locations. So at the moment, we are throughout Central and Eastern Europe with more than 100 business parks at the moment, more than 400 buildings, more than 7 million square meters, mostly of warehouse space, plus a land bank of 13 million square meters that is available to facilitate the future growth of our clients throughout Central and Eastern Europe, plus Austria, plus the Netherlands, and soon also with Germany. In our buildings, our buildings are rented to over about 700 companies, and here you can see a selection of some of our biggest clients. Most of the clients that you see on this slide, they are in multiple locations within our network, and they're operating typically from more than one country. Our clients, we want to make sure that our clients are growing, and to give you an idea how much we work together with our existing clients, At the end of the third quarter of last year, we had about 1.1 million square meters under construction, out of which 74% was under construction, already pre-leased to existing clients. That gives you a bit of an idea of the magnitude of our cooperation with our existing clients. So we grow when our clients are growing, and we will do whatever we can to make sure that our clients will be successful. So in addition to providing real estate solutions, we're also supporting our clients with meeting their goals with regards to sustainability. And we also support our clients to help them integrate and connect within local communities by connecting them to other companies, connecting them to universities, to schools, and also to authorities. So what I find so amazing and special about CTP is that the vision that Raymond started with almost more than 20 years ago, it still holds true, and that is to provide a modern, representative, and high quality buildings with potential for future growth throughout the region, throughout Central and Eastern Europe and beyond. So having said that, and I think that's for now enough about CTP, probably, I will hand over the word now to René Buck to give the main presentation of today about how Central and Eastern Europe can solve your supply chain challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bert, for your kind introduction. Let's say what I want to do today is talk a little bit about Central and Eastern Europe and the opportunities to which they can help you to organize an efficient supply chain right now. I will do that in 5 different ways, with chapters focusing after a short introduction on BCI, talking about the assets of Central and Eastern Europe, different network setups, because you can organize your supply chain in various ways, and then focus a little bit on 2 focus industries, e-commerce and high-tech. Now, BCI itself is a company, as a quick introduction, supported 36 years ago, working in a variety of industries to help clients with manufacturing footprint optimization, with supply chain network design, with site selection for a variety of industries. And we do that as a completely independent advisor to support clients, not only in Europe, but also in North America and in Asia, with the right solutions. So that's what we try to give companies, independent advice on what the best way is to look for the right strategies from a manufacturing and supply chain point of view, but then also what are the right locations for that. And you can imagine that over time, we got a number of clients who were interested in Central and Eastern Europe. Actually, if you look into that, you could say, well, over the last couple of years, we worked more in Central and Eastern Europe than in some of the Western European countries. So with our 75 consultants, we work in a variety of industries, as you can see here, and obviously we don't go over them, but it's the variety of industries and being all over the place in the world, which helps us to support clients in various ways, whether it's on manufacturing or distribution or whatsoever. Now, for that's a quick introduction to BCI. Now, let's talk about Central and Eastern Europe. And officially, Central and Eastern Europe consists of 12 countries. Now, for this webinar, we focus more on 7 countries. So we leave the Baltic states, Slovenia, apart, and Albania, and focus on other countries which you could say the core of Central and Eastern Europe. Now, if you look into those 7 countries, you will see that those 7 countries are the major players in the market. And the way how I want to do this quick introduction into Central and Eastern Europe is look into 4 different pillars. And you see in green ones which I will touch upon. Let's say time is not enough to go all over them. So talk a little bit about the market potential, about costs, about quality of the business environment and low risk, and give you some comparisons so that you can also see how this compares with other countries in Europe or around the place. Here you see those 7 countries. They are all EU countries except for Serbia. And I put there in red mined regional differences. I will come back to that later on, but if you talk about labor climate, if you talk about rents, if you talk about operating costs, they really vary region by region within those countries. So if you look to Central and Eastern Europe, and I have to say it's more or less the same for nearly every country in the world, national averages hide a little bit the differences between the various regions in a country. Now, an important element is to show that Central and Eastern Europe is really doing well. You could say, yeah, they come from a lower volume as from a GDP point of view. But here you can see that Central and Eastern Europe in the green line is doing better and is also forecasted to, from an economic point of view, to do better the next years as Western Europe. So that's an important element to take into account. This region is not a backlash region. This region is a front runner in terms of GDP growth in Europe. Now, that's on the market potential side, and obviously the proximity to the European market is essential as well. From a cost point of view, we see that, and you see here gross salaries for a blue-collar worker, that on the labor cost side there are advantages in Central and Eastern Europe, because on the right-hand side you see in red Germany and UK, just for your reference. And you see the same in real estate costs. If you took the prime warehouse rents per square meter, you can also see that that the 7 CEE countries here under investigation have a more cost-effective structure than in other Western European countries. So from a cost perspective, Central and Eastern Europe can be interesting. Here is on the distribution side, and on the distribution side, you have 2 angles. You have the perspective of serving out of Central and Eastern Europe, the whole European Union or whole Europe. And you have the perspective which is put here. What is the right location? If CEE in itself is growing that fast, then it's also interesting that to find out what is the best country to be in. And if you are in Slovakia, and you take the GDP and the center of gravity into account of the various CEE countries, then Slovakia is an interesting place to serve those 7 countries, which you can see here on screen. So after the market potential and the cost, let's take a look at the quality of the business environment. And this is also to look into the available workforce. Now, as we know, the economic recovery in Europe is going pretty fast, and in many countries and regions we are pre-COVID-19 levels. So if you see the current employment and unemployment levels, you can compare them more or less with December 2019, when nobody of us had ever heard of COVID-19. So there is a potential in the availability of the workforce, because in some countries, and certainly on a regional level, unemployment levels are attractive. And I'm not denying that in some regions in Central and Eastern Europe, finding the right workforce is also a challenge. But overall, let's say there is a willing and available workforce. And as we just saw a minute ago, also, let's say with cost-effective total employers cost. Quality of the business environment is not only about availability of people and personnel, it's also about logistics quality. And these are stats from the World Bank, who makes every year a large report on the logistics performance index. And you can see here that in terms of logistics services and infrastructure, these are the logistics performance index is based on a variety of factors, that although the global leaders in Western Europe have a better infrastructure and are even more used to high level of logistics services industries, but that CEE is certainly catching up and is doing, and everything you ask, let's be honest, there are hundreds of US, German, UK, French companies operating in Central and Eastern Europe. And you can see here also that on the, from a competitiveness point of view and from an ease of doing business, and once Bert has shared the whole presentation, you can see that they are on pretty good standards if you compare them with peer countries as well. Important is also a risk. Political risk, if you see here in dark green, that's comparable with Germany and France, in light green on the left-hand side, comparable with Spain. So the political risk is overall relatively low. That's also on the natural disaster risk side, because if you see the explanation, you will see that Bulgaria, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland have very low natural disaster risk, and Romania, Serbia, and Hungary medium. So if you take the four elements together, market potential, costs, quality of the business environment, and risk, you have a pretty good environment. Now, how can that fit into your supply chain setup, in your supply chain strategy? And we all know that the different way how you set up your supply chain is heavily dependent on your business strategy and also on your customer service strategy, because supply chain and real estate strategy are in function of those. And obviously we see in a variety of industries that you have to look into different types of strategies to fulfill the needs of the various channels. And certainly in e-commerce type of companies, you really have to look into what is the best way to service the various channels in a proper way. Now, we looked into a study for CTP into these 8 different types of warehouses. Now, you can imagine that if you are looking for a low-cost European distribution center, then you have different locations which come into place. And if you say, okay, we don't have to cover Europe as a whole, but we want to have a distribution center which is servicing Central and Eastern Europe, or we want to have a distribution center in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly also to serve the large German market. You have smaller distribution center for next day, same day delivery or cross-dock operations. And also on the manufacturing side, there are different types of profiles. So you cannot say one size fits all. You cannot say, well, this is the right location for this distribution center. It really depends on what the distribution center you have in mind, or the production center you have in mind, how that fits into your network structure. And just to give you a couple of examples, you can imagine, you see that here in green, if you want to set up a distribution center where the focus is not only on Central and Eastern Europe, but also serving that important German market, that you can imagine that then the western borders of Poland and the Czech Republic are interesting just because they are bordering Germany. And if you have a regional distribution center only for Central and Eastern Europe, then the greatest Bratislava area, I mentioned before, Slovakia, are an interesting region. So it's really depending on the functions you want to locate in Central and Eastern Europe, where you look at. If you have a European distribution center, it should be close to the large Western German market in Germany, UK, and France, and the Benelux. National distribution centers, it's obviously more focused on center of gravity. So whereas the majority of the size of the population and the economic activities. It becomes more complex if you look to manufacturing. Different types of manufacturing. Do we have high value, high skills? And you look also more into elements like universities and skilled labor force, and that's different types of location than a more lower cost manufacturing operation. So basically what you have to think about, if you take the assets of Central and Eastern Europe into account, and you have a profile of, hey, what kind of operation in Central and Eastern Europe could help me to reach my supply chain and my manufacturing objectives, that determines also, at the end of the day, the countries and the regions you take into consideration. Now let's take 2 examples. Let's look in the e-commerce, and then later on I will touch upon high-tech. Now, e-commerce, nobody in this webinar will deny that the e-commerce market is an interesting one from a business to consumer perspective, but also for a business to business perspective. And that in various types of industries, we see a huge growth of e-commerce. By the way, it's not only e-commerce in all over Europe. Central and Eastern Europe, those 7 countries which we are highlighting here, also have high growth figures of e-commerce. So it's not only looking into how can CEE help me to serve the growing e-commerce market in Western Europe, it's also can be interesting for your line of business to look into how can I, with a setup in Central and Eastern Europe, deliver the products to service the increasing demand from customers and inhabitants of Central and Eastern Europe itself. Now, if you set up an e-commerce setup, and it's a topic where you can do very different types of webinars on. But let me summarize 5 challenges. It's about channel complexity, it's about scalability, it's about need for speed, because that's always what you want as a customer. It's the partner strategy, other platforms you want to use, and profitability. So these are 5 challenges which you see in various types of industries where there is a strong e-commerce element. Now, I don't gonna explain you this whole slide, but traditionally, certainly in a number of industries, you had different pillars. You have how to serve the wholesalers, how to serve the retail shops, and how to serve e-commerce. And you can see here on the vertical axis, that depends, you will have different profiles from inbound, from processing, what happens in the warehouse, and the delivery, the outbound distribution, including returns. And basically what you see is that e-commerce, the clients are asking that you don't see it as pillar by pillar, but that, as you can see on the bottom side in green, that you have an omni-channel solution, that you have a solution that you can buy everywhere and deliver everywhere. And that's more or less what this picture tries to tell you. You have store distribution centers which also deliver out of the store the households, the individual customers. You have combo DCs, the combination distribution centers and retail shops and inhabitants which have ordered online are being served. So there are different types of structures. So these slides are not only meant to impress you, but are also here to tell you for your individual line of industry, and that's what our company specializes in, you have to look into what is the specific supply chain setup we have to take into account. An important element is that you also have to look then, if you take a pan-European view, how much of these distribution centers do I need to service my customers? And that obviously depends on the service level. You recall one of my earlier slides, well, whatever the customer service strategy is, that determines also the supply chain strategy. You can imagine that if you say, well, I deliver tomorrow, you need a different distribution center structure in Europe and also in Central and Eastern Europe than if you say, well, I deliver my product in 6 weeks, because you have a different delivery time. So depending on speed requirements, you get also a different geographical setup. Now, an important element is also that e-commerce generates a large demand for warehouse space. You know that if you have an e-commerce activity within your own company, in comparison, serving e-commerce is on average 3 times as much square meters than if you serve only offline retail shops. So basically what we see here is that the growth in e-commerce is also an accelerated and exponential growth of companies looking for the right supply of real estate, of warehouses, of distribution centers, fulfillment centers, spare part centers across the place. So that additional demand comes that you have more stock in a DC than in the physical stores. You have return flows which you have to process. You need more inventory if you have next day or even same day delivery. So that's the reason why e-commerce is not only asking for more space, but is asking far more space that if you would have a certain channel, a retail channels with shops, which grows 2%, and e-commerce would also grow 2%, then the 2% of e-commerce is asking 3 times as much space than the traditional delivery of a retail shop. So that requirements means also that the warehouse requirements are different, and that the warehouse requirements where they fit into your business model, your supply chain strategy, or your manufacturing strategy determine how and where you should set up these kind of e-commerce centers. Let's go to high tech, completely different setup. And in high tech, and I wanted to focus a little bit also on assembly, production, manufacturing operations, because we know and we see a lot of discussion in media and elsewhere on why companies are looking for decentralization. Decentralization, we call it often in Europe and in the US reshoring, is that companies who have large manufacturing capabilities in China and in Asia reconsider whether that's the right setup. Now, you could say, well, there are clear reasons why companies should decentralize. We all learned in the COVID-19 situation that the sourcing risk was very high because suddenly you realized that a certain component or sub-assembly was only coming from one supplier in Asia, and it could even be your own plant, but only one plant producing that. We see also that the risks, trade barrier risk, a lot of American companies who had to face the difficulties in trading and exporting and importing from China. Notice that there is a trade barrier risk, which is also for companies a strategic reason to say, well, hey, do we really want to have all our production eggs in one Chinese basket, or should we decentralize so that we have more resilient supply chains? But there's still a large distance between China or Southeast Asia. Think about Thailand or Vietnam, where a lot of companies have set up shop as well. But back to Europe, that's still a huge distance. So there are these reasons why you would say, well, that's a clear, good reason to go to Europe or have more manufacturing activities in Europe. On the other hand, you have to look into, is the labor force there? But also importantly, and that's also where I think Central and Eastern Europe has a lot to offer, is there a supply base? Because you cannot say, hey, I want to have these breathing machines, which we use in intensive care units, and all of a sudden you relocate that production capacity, say, out of Malaysia to Central and Eastern Europe, then you have to be sure that there is also a supplier and ecosystem where you can get all these components. And that's an important element and also an important consideration for companies. So if companies look into Central and Eastern Europe in terms of how can that region setting up a manufacturing or an assembly operation in Central and Eastern Europe help my resilience, supports the resilience of the manufacturing strategy, then labor supply base, obviously costs are important elements to that as well. So due to that, this decentralization strategy and the drive for companies to have risk resilient supply chains, we see here that companies follow various strategies. They put higher inventory levels in major markets, say in this case in Europe, France and the UK and Germany, and that's why we have such large warehouses there. But there are also other strategies which are all linked, which can all be linked to Central and Eastern Europe. Near sourcing, decentralization of distribution, more postponed assembly, and even the production itself. So for various risk mitigation strategies, you can really see here that Central and Eastern Europe can play an interesting role. Now, if you look to these opportunities in assembly and manufacturing, it has also to do with late customization, or, and that's an ugly word, countryfication. So finalizing and assembling your products at the latest moment to be sure that you are in time with the latest requirements of clients. And we see that in various industries. So particular participants in machinery and equipment, high-tech production, medtech and med devices should take a closer look in how can Central and Eastern Europe play a role for us in terms of decentralization of production with late assembly, so that you still have interesting solutions for your clients in terms of make to order instead of make to stock solutions. So that's also on the high tech side. So what I tried to do, and this is my last slide, we tried to look into what has Central and Eastern Europe to offer. Think about cost, think about market potential, quality of the business environment, and risk. Then you have to look into the various models, the various distribution setup, there's various supply chain setups, And that's where Central and Eastern Europe, and you have to investigate that obviously for your own company, can really have an opportunity in terms of resilience, flexibility, scalability, and cost effectiveness, which is being required. And as you saw on the e-commerce side, where that speed and the market potential is there, as well as on the decentralization of production and distribution side, where in Central and Eastern Europe, you can find an interesting combination of cost effectiveness on the one hand and supply base on the other hand. That is for many companies these days consideration to say, hey, let's take a closer look at Central and Eastern Europe. And I talked about Central and Eastern Europe, whether it's one country. And I started this presentation by saying that's not the case. You know, it's not one country, it's not one region, not one country. You have even to look into the regions within that country. But I think it's important, and that's the main message here today, that if you are looking for cost-effective, resilient supply chains, you have to consider Central and Eastern Europe and investigate how that could contribute to the objectives you have. And with that, I give the floor back to Bert and see what he comes up with in his discussions with the panelists.
Good. I will immediately switch to Raymond Vos. You saw the opportunity of Central and Eastern Europe already a very long time ago. At the end of the 90s, you already went to the region. Can you maybe take us back to what attracted you to the region and what has happened since then?
Yeah, hey Bert, hello everybody. Me speaking from Lublin in Poland. Well, yeah, there was nothing like vision, honestly, when I came first to Czechoslovakia or to the region. That was more about looking for opportunities. I was 24 and there was a Dutch company who wanted to bring, this is my wife and me sitting in that office this is Humpolets. Well, it's not actually, the picture is not even Humpolets. The picture is where we first started. Was a an older communistic built complex where we had a small area where we then installed some machines. We got some old machines over from the Netherlands, and then we started welding and bending all kind of metal parts, because it was cheap labor, and that was back in the days. But soon, and that's good. I had no idea, no education or experience when it comes to running production. But with those old machines, which we got from the Netherlands and a few other which we bought in Prague, and I remember, and in Brno, where we were going to buy secondhand machines back in 95, 96. Anyway, we put it all together in a production line, which was really not fantastic because there were no buildings available. But we were doing more with those machines, which we got from Holland, than they had ever produced in the Netherlands with those same machines. And I think that was the first time when I saw, shit, it's not about low-cost manufacturing, it's about the skills and the motivation people had in 95, 96, but still have. So the whole region of Central Europe is, on average, the people are motivated, they're happy to work. There is labor, local labor, but it's also labor coming from Ukraine, for example. So there is no labor shortage. And that's what I see if I travel around and if I talk to my clients. I mean, in the meantime, we then set up a company, CTP, because honestly, I couldn't find a building myself. So in 95, 96, I struggled in that old building. And then business became bigger and larger, and we really needed a new building, and we didn't want to build that. So we were looking for some developer to rent because we wanted to invest money in core business. Anyway, that's a longer story, but then we found investors from Holland, and I teamed up with them, and anyway, we built our own building. At least we rented that building, but within a business park, because I also thought, look, my company at that time, it was a company from Holland. It can't be so that is the only company. So what we should do, we should actually offer property solutions for companies involved in manufacturing and or logistics. So they can focus on core business, they can invest in their core business, and we would be the property partner. So this is really my personal experience from a manufacturing job or business I had into real estate, was because I really needed a building myself. And then I focused on building other buildings for other companies involved in manufacturing and or logistics. And then indeed set up a park with all facilities and services, including nowadays healthcare. Yeah, this is a Bucharest healthcare. There's a nice restaurant facility. There's also meeting rooms. We provide education and healthcare free of charge. So we really make sure that the tenants can focus on their core business and make money with doing that. So we also make sure there's affordable housing available if we have people coming in and work in such a business park, but they need to travel from far. Then we also make sure there is accommodation. So it's what we call Central Europe, and I used to say it's a business smart location with lots of new infrastructure, motorways, airports, you name it, because obviously 25 years ago there was almost nothing. So it's new infrastructure, motivated, skilled workforce, and on top of that, the government who are supporting these type of developments, and that's obviously very important, very I would say business friendly environment as what we see here. So and then on top of that, all of those clients in the portfolio at CTP in the meantime, which are more than 700 of them, they continue to grow, and that's where we get new business from. And whether this is if they do e-bikes or if they assemble furniture or do, I don't know, automotive, or you have, of course, textile, fashion retailers, you have all kind of different. It's just a pleasure to work in this part of Europe, I must say, and I understand very well why many companies decide to come over and then grow their business later on. And not only for sending it back to Western Europe, as René also mentioned, but also obviously in the meantime, there's lots of consumers here, which is a great market opportunity. So from my side, nothing but positive about the region. It's true. In Romania, they know how to cook, or they cook in a different way maybe than in other parts, whatever. But overall, very nice and very pleasant part of the world, I think, to work and to invest in.
Great, thank you, Raymond. I think I would like to take it now to Raimund Petzmann of Zalando. It is quite interesting, Raimund, because you're a German company, but also investing heavily in Central and Eastern Europe. Raymond just mentioned consumers in Central and Eastern Europe, that the market is also growing from that point of view. How do you look at the consumer market in Central and Eastern Europe? What is the potential there that you see for Zalando? Or is Central and Eastern Europe primarily a market for you from where you can then distribute more cheaply towards the main markets in Western Europe?
Thanks, Bert. Hello to everybody. Also from my side, happy to join you, and interesting presentations. I'm always impressed by Raymond's way how he started, and inspiring, and also René with his details. If he would not have all the internal resources to do this kind of research, we would definitely use someone like René with his expertise. However, coming to your question, for us, it's really the market in Central Eastern Europe. So we see a huge opportunity there, and we're quite successful already in Eastern Europe. So we are in all the markets in Poland and Czech Republic, entering Romania, Estonia, Lithuania. So we are really there for, doing the business, as René said, really for the market. Of course, we also have a part what is, using some opportunities that we can do the western part of Germany, at the eastern part of Germany. It's definitely something what we're also doing. But the main focus is really the market. We have a lot of success with the customers. They're buying a lot of fashion from our side. So it's just a success story from setting up distribution and also from a customer perspective.
Mm-hmm. My wife certainly loves Zalando. I live in Prague, and so I can tell that Zalando is increasing in popularity also in our household. Can you maybe, so far it's been quite positive, everything about Central and Eastern Europe, but you've been quite active in that region for quite some time already. Have you had some worse experiences as well? Can you maybe describe some of your worst but also good experiences, please?
So first of all, it's always a sandwich, but I think in general over the last 5 years, I would say it's really successful. I think it's a lot of expertise now in, of course, on the real estate side already since a longer time, but also with the planning authorities. For me, the worst experience, and I think Raymond will remember very well, even if it was not his fault, I think he or CTP did the very best at this time, but the worst experience for me ever, actually of the projects, was always the project we had in Brno. And this was only due to the government. It was also very interesting on the other side, because it was a time when I met almost everyone for the government. Babiš at the time, it was also the time when the coalition was actually changing, and Sobotka was still the prime minister, and Babiš the finance minister. So I had interesting meeting with him. Always makes me remember when I heard something about him. So that's something that sticks with me. But however, this was kind of an early day, and probably in Czech Republic also with all the anti-corruption laws and not being able to do the highway accesses and not very reliable, but this has changed. So it's really the positive perspective now. So more and more they understand the needs. Of course, it's everywhere. I think that's even in Central Eastern Europe now, that you're not everywhere welcome. So it also depends if the infrastructure is not good enough. There might be always some local guys against it, but I think also the governments found ways how to deal with it and not being just against it. So I have to say, in the last 5 years, we just made very good experiences in Central Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'd like to include Miguel now into the discussion as well. And we'd like to, hi Miguel, we'd like to ask you, you've been, well, you grew up in Portugal, you've been active in similar supply chain roles for other companies throughout Europe, the world. You've been now active in Central and Eastern Europe for about 3 years. What's your experience of doing business in Central and Eastern Europe?
Hello, thank you for the invite and for being here. Very glad to be here with everybody. So I have to say that my experience, and we as a retail network of 2,400 pharmacies, we operate in the countries exactly in the region that René presented in his presentation. So 7 central CEE countries, and I have to say that the experience is very good. The stability of the markets is very good. The markets are growing fast, so this is clearly, as we spoke before, not about setting up here only to send products to Western Europe. These markets are in reality growing faster, as it was already shown, than the Western Europe markets, and they will be kept like this for a long time. The work ethics and the availability of qualified resources are very, very high here in this region. So it's very easy to find good people. The quality of life is very good. So it's also easy to attract talent. I have to say that in our board, we are 7 board members and we have 7 different nationalities. So it's a good example of that. The infrastructure and the connections are very good, especially in the countries also, as shown by René, more close to the western border. So Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, of course, Romania, Serbia, a little bit further from that. But on these countries, the cost basis is still much lower than on the central part of Central Europe. And therefore, although there is a little bit more political risk, as also was pointed, there is also more opportunity. And these are markets growing at a very, very fast pace. I would have to say, if I pick one negative point, maybe, or one point of attention, is that contrary to Western countries, maybe not all the good providers and the good partners are present in these markets. So when you want to do things fast, it's better that you choose the right partners. And we are here also together with CTP, which is one of the leading partners. And of course, this applies not only to the buildings, but to the technology and to all the major suppliers that underlie a good supply chain. So this is very important because the maturity in these markets, it's still not so high, and sometimes there are some risks.
Good. I see that we have many questions coming in from the audience. Let me pick up a few of these. This one is for you, Raimund, about sustainability. I mean, Zalando is focused big time on sustainability. How does this have an impact on your location decisions?
It has an impact because we really try to optimize our entire supply chain. So that's really something maybe not everyone knows it, but Zalando really has a sustainability strategy. We really want to become, a sustainable fashion supplier because we acknowledge that fashion in general is maybe not the most sustainable part. So we're really trying to optimize the supply chain. So we're also looking in the distances we are driving, but mainly it's also into the building, into the packaging. So everything what we can do beside it, because transportation at a certain point, you have to do it. It's also that we are providing electricity for the future. It's not really there yet, but the trucks could load in the future with our solar panels on the roof, and really trying to build the infrastructure that we are ready for for e-mobility as soon as possible. And we're also working on a step change project. We also had once discussion for one project with you, doing something together. So really, how can we do the most sustainable building possible?
See here a question for Raymond. You're almost everywhere in Central and Eastern Europe. Where do you still see opportunities for further growth?
Well, we are not always almost everywhere, I think, but we do our best. We follow our clients, and we started in the Czech Republic, where we covered a lot of the country with different business parks. And also Raymond mentioned a very interesting thing about Amazon and the discussion we had in Brno years ago, and that didn't work. And that was not because of, that was just the circumstances, I think. But anyway, it also started us think of going outside of the Czech Republic. So that whole thing had different consequences, actually, which was not bad. So, but we followed our clients, and we are indeed now in most of the region. I think there are opportunities in most of the countries. Honestly, if you ask me, in and around Bucharest, which is not just Bucharest or not just Romania. We now have recently done a project for IKEA. Then Bucharest for IKEA is a regional hub. And out of Bucharest, they do Bulgaria, but also they supply into Turkey, into Istanbul. So that is just to explain why there are still lots of opportunities and untapped. And I think same in for example, Serbia, which obviously is also under René's presentation. I saw this the highest unemployment. So if you talk about labor, if you need a lot of labor and labor cost, then that could be some location to consider. There's lots of skills and tradition in manufacturing, for example. So Serbia definitely, not just for manufacturing, by the way, also in and around Belgrade, you will not find warehouses. And if you look at statistics and you would look at how many people live in the Netherlands or in Germany, and you would look at how many square meters of warehouse or these light industrial properties is that per 10,000 people, you will come to the conclusion that in Central Europe, you're far off of what the Western European markets are. So there's still a lot of catching up to do overall because of e-commerce, but also because I agree with what René said about the trends we see. Also for nearshoring, people like to have some manufacturing, or at least a facility where they can do assembly or repair. And then Central Europe overall is a very good location. Poland, as I said, I'm in Poland at the moment, in Lublin, which is on the east side. But obviously you fly in here, it's an hour and 50 minutes away from Warsaw. It's good for labor. So infrastructure has been developed so well in this part of the world. So there is still lots of opportunities in and around Central Europe for sure. Yeah, I think so.
Your question to Miguel about automation. How much do you automate your warehouses, and are there differences to the level of automation between countries?
Yes, we automate a lot. So we have very high automatized the warehouses with the shuttles, mini loads. We are now doing AMR, especially in the e-com operations. Of course, on countries on labor restrictions are higher, and where we see wages inflation growing, we invest faster because we cannot do everything at the same time. And I think here what applies is a little bit what Raymond was just saying. Even within the countries, we need to have kind of a lot of attention with the locations, because within the same country, you can position yourself in a place that you cannot get enough labor and where you can get into trouble, or you can get yourself in a nice position where you can get labor. But even to give maybe an example, illustrative example on the development of these countries, we have in Romania circa 1,000 FTEs at the moment only on supply chain on our warehouses, and we have a plan to have 10% of the workforce this year coming from Nepal. So you see that we are importing Nepalese workers into Romania, which some years ago, I think nobody would believe me. So that shows that you need to automate, that you need to move forward. Otherwise, you will be dead. Then you need to do it fast.
Here, an interesting question. I would like to put this to René Buck. What are the effects on logistics locations in Austria? Are they still interesting with the rise of Central and Eastern Europe?
I think Austria is really a Western style European country, already for many years a member of the European Union. But look at the map. If you just look from the map, you will see that Switzerland and Austria are in the heart of Europe. That means that from a time delivery point of view and from a distance point of view, you are closer to the main European markets. But honestly speaking, let's say the cost levels in Austria are substantially higher than in Central and Eastern Europe. But Austria has the advantages of being in the heart of Europe, easy access to the various countries, and that for certain types of businesses, that has an appeal. And I think that's also the message I would like to bring across. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for Central and Eastern Europe. There is no one-size-fits-all solutions for the various types of industries companies are today participating in this webinar. You have to look to your own supply chain and manufacturing setup, look into whether a Central and Eastern European option, due to its cost and the quality of business environment and low risk, is an interesting opportunity to make your supply chains more resilient, more efficient, and more cost effective. And for some countries, Austria can play a role there. For a substantial other part of the companies, typical Central and Eastern European countries like the Czech Republic and Hungary and Serbia, as Ramon was mentioning, will be part of their solutions.
Good question here to Raymond. Miguel was, so the question is about the housing, housing staff. So for the Nepalese people needing accommodation, how would you accommodate people from Nepal if Miguel asks you where I want to make sure that they live in a good place?
Yeah, no, that's clear. I mean, all of these activities, obviously, they then result into demand for labor, and some is available locally. Some need to move to places where there are jobs, and I think throughout the region, in Poland for sure, people move from one part of Poland to the other, and they stop moving away from Poland. You see the signs of them returning, and that's good because there are a lot of opportunities in these markets in Central Europe. But yeah, there can be still situations whereby you need to import or whereby you have people from abroad coming over to establish or to work in Central Europe. And yeah, therefore also you see multiple residential developments, and that is another market which is growing significantly. Yeah, what we can do, and we can of course not build for all of these people accommodation, but we do that. So there's a few examples we have in the Czech Republic where we have built nice accommodation for these kind of people who come 2 weeks and then they have a few days off and then they return, etc., etc. Initially as an interim solution until they decide to come over and to establish themselves for longer. And that's what we do in the Czech Republic, as we do in Romania as well now. In Bucharest, we've done that also in Brno, slightly different, but all under the same umbrella of affordable housing for people who come over to work, and mostly for our partners, whereby in Brno, for example, is more like housing for young professionals and students, but same thing. We see it as a part of our park making concept that you also offer accommodation for those people. And that all is again part of our ESG, in this case the S social, that can we do more for education, can we do affordable housing, can we do healthcare and those kind of things, in which in a park you can provide those, and that's also appreciated. I mean, ultimately, as I said at the beginning, when I came over with my little low-cost manufacturing thing, I was busy with that, and that was my core business. So we want to now make sure that CTP offers most of those services to our clients so they can focus on what their core business is, because that's where their money is. So we try to be a real service provider, and then that's what we do, and we'll continue to do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Here, for the sake of time, I think this would be the last question that we will address. It's for René. You focused on high tech and e-commerce. What other sectors did you forget?
Oh, no, we didn't forget it, but let's say in the time given, let's say I could not cover other industries as well. I think we see opportunities in the fast-moving consumer goods. We see some pharma companies looking into that. So if you look at less, for example, in food, if you really want to have a European coverage, that is already pretty much decentralized. So it's not only on e-commerce and high tech, but I wanted to show that in e-commerce you have typical supply chains and typical demands of companies, and you have to organize your supply chain in a different way than if you produce more discrete products like in high-tech products or medtech products or in FMCG. So it's certainly not limited to that, because what we see also in our own portfolio of companies looking for the right supply chain setup in Europe, we see that really across industries. And we were recently working on a project for an automotive supplier in Serbia, for example. So it's not limited to e-focus and to e-commerce and high tech, but it's just for time reasons that I focus this afternoon on those.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I take as a conclusion that everybody should be in Central and Eastern Europe. I would like to thank Raimund for joining the discussion today. Miguel, René, Raymond, thank you very much. The presentation will be shared with you. I will send it to you by email within 48 hours after today's webinar, which is now. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.